Deb Hoekstra here with Bee-Bug Creations, and I'm down in my studio today with another card making 101 video. Today I'm going to show you how to heat emboss, and there are just a few tools that you need in order to heat emboss. You need a heat gun, you need an embossing buddy, you need embossing powder, and Stampin' Up's embossing powder comes in little containers like this. You need an ink pad, and in this case I'm using a Versamark ink pad. Craft ink will also work. The regular classic Stampin' Up ink will not work to emboss. You need some sort of ink that's going to sit on top of your card surface and not absorb into the cardstock, so that you can catch the embossing powder with it. So either a Versamark pad or craft ink will work for this. And then of course you need a stamp. So let's get started. I'm going to move a few things out of the way here. The first thing that I always do when I heat emboss is use a embossing buddy. And the embossing buddy has, I don't know what it has in it, but as you wipe it across the surface of the cardstock, it takes away any of the electrostatic cling that you quite often get on cardstock, and then that allows the embossing powder to fall off except on the area where you stamp. So I'm going to open up my Versamark ink pad, and I'm going to ink up my flower stamp. And by the way, this flower is from the Flower Shop stamp set, and I don't know if you can see that. I think you can. You can kind of see how it looks shiny. And so when I put my stamp down, I'm going to stamp like I would with a regular stamp. And when I lift the stamp up, you'll probably hear kind of it release from the paper. Oh, I guess it didn't do that today. Sometimes it does. And I'm going to cover my Versamark ink so I don't get embossing powder in it when I get to that point. Here is what, and I don't know if you can see this with the camera or not, but the image is stamped on there, and it's kind of shiny. So now I'm going to bring my white embossing powder over. And Stampin' Up sells several different colors of embossing powder. Now, I showed you the little container that the Stampin' Up embossing powder comes in. This is what I do with my embossing powder. I don't like to try to get it back in that little container once I use it. So I put my embossing powder in a bigger container that I can hold my cardstock over as I sprinkle the powder over it. And then once I get the powder on it, I turn it over. And you can see here how there are little flecks of embossing powder. So I'm going to turn it over, and I'm going to just kind of flick it off. And sometimes you get a few flicks that don't move. And so then you can just take a little paintbrush and brush any remaining flecks off. Now I want to say a word about embossing powder. Before I became a Stampin' Up demonstrator, I was so frustrated with heat embossing. I could never get a good melt on my embossing powder, and it was because I wasn't using Stampin' Up embossing powder. Since becoming a demonstrator, it's the only embossing powder I use, and I think it's a finer grain than what you can buy in some of the box stores, and it melts better when the heat is applied. So if you're not using Stampin' Up embossing powder and you're having trouble with your heat embossing results, I would suggest that you switch to Stampin' Up embossing powder, and you'll probably notice a difference. Now it's time for me to heat this up and melt the embossing powder, and as I heat it, it will turn shiny. So I'll turn on my gun, and then I'm just going to direct the heat at my image, and I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but when it gets hot enough, eventually there it's starting, you'll see that the powder goes from dull to shiny. So as it melts, it goes from dull to shiny. I'm going to just flip it around because I don't want to burn my fingers. The heat gun is really hot. Sometimes I use a tweezer to hold my project while I'm heating it. And there we go. It is all heat embossed and set. And I don't know if you can, I think you can kind of see how it's shiny. Before you go to touch it, I would let it cool 1 to 2 minutes. and let that embossing powder set up. I've had it before where I've touched it too soon and I've left a fingerprint in the embossing powder. So just let it cool for a little bit. It should be dry by now. Yep. And then you can just run your finger across it and it will be raised and feel kind of shiny. So that's it. That's how you heat emboss a stamped image. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you enjoyed this little video. You can find more creative inspiration at my website at www.bbugcreations.com. Until next time, happy stampin'.